When it comes to insolvency, acting early always ends in a better outcome. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of business owners that we supported recently. They weren't cowboys, they weren't reckless, they weren't trying to dodge responsibility. Here is the story of what really happened to them. So let's dig into the business model, right? I'm going to slow this right down and explain to you what this business did because it mattered, okay? It was a relatively small company. It had 3 PAYE staff. It had around 13 regular subcontractors, okay? So the work used to come in and they would sub it out, and they essentially had 3 staff that were employed that sort of pulled the strings, if you will. But there was massive daily operating costs, okay? So these were the things that really didn't change. They were very reliant on plant that they had to hire in, traffic management, and also utility suppliers, okay? So as you probably know, listen, you can be a busy person out there. You can have work booked in and you can still be under massive cash flow strain. There wasn't a lack of demand with this business. It was working capital. That was the problem. They didn't have the money to keep going and keep rolling the dice because the turnover were quite high, but the profit margins were really, really low. It was such a competitive industry. But the idea was, listen, if we can do loads and loads and loads of work, even though it's a small percentage, we're going to make some decent money. But when it's a small percentage, you don't have any room for error. And this is how the pressure built on this business. Now, what happened here is something I see all the time, especially in construction, okay? One of the suppliers started to get a bit twitchy, then another, then word starts to get out, the phone starts blowing up, and before you know it, these 2 lads, who were decent lads, they were fighting for their lives. And they were putting out fires every single day. And just to give you an idea of like who the creditors were, there was a grab hire company that was over 40 grand. They were really, really aggressive. They sent a stat demand. They were on the verge of sending a winding up petition. There was a hire company who believed they were owed 80,000 quid, but it was disputed. And the company believed it was more like 30,000. There was a utility supplier that was owed about £50,000, and other sort of subcontractors and you know, people who are doing work, they were owed about 70,000. Now, in addition to this, the revenue were owed 190,000. This was VAT, some PAYE, and last year's corporation tax. Okay. Now I want to pause here. Because one of the things that the lads hadn't done is they hadn't signed any personal guarantees on any of these debts. They were about to. They were about to sign PGs against both their houses. Now, this could have got a lot worse for both of these directors. And I really understand it. Listen, when you're under massive pressure, sometimes the danger isn't the debt. The danger is how you respond to the debt. By the way, if anyone's watching this and they can identify with what I'm saying and you want some free and independent advice off the #1 corporate insolvency business on Trustpilot, go to the description. At the top, there is a link. Click on that link. One of my team will call you today. We are free. We are independent. We will give you a steer on what your options are. But getting back to that point where directors, when they're under pressure, they make bad decisions. I see these type of things happening all the time. First one is you will panic paying the loudest creditor, you know, the one that's banging on your door. And in this case, they were getting threatened. They were getting threatened personally. Another thing is people carry on trading, hoping that the next job sorts everything out. And I see that a lot with businesses that don't have really accurate financial information. So the basics that we need to be reading as a business owner is a profit and loss, especially in construction, you know, a profit and loss on each job. Because if you just have a blanket profit and loss in construction, it can hide bad jobs, it can hide eroding margins. And I think a 13-week rolling cash flow is mega important. Because what this does is it sort of tells you where you are as a business, and it tells you where your business is going to be over the next 3 months. And another thing people do is they just ignore the pressure. Like they bury their head in the sand, they start ducking and diving calls. And what happens is eventually one of your creditors will issue proceedings against you. They'll start with phone calls, start with letters, maybe get a CCJ, but eventually they'll wind the business up. And it's where a winding up petition is applied for in court, and they go to court and say, listen, this company needs winding up because they can't pay the debts on time. You get the winding up petition landing on your doorstep, and it could be from HMRC, could be a supplier, could be from a subcontractor. But from that point, like, you're on the clock, because in a couple of weeks the petition might get advertised. When it gets advertised, your bank account's going to be frozen. Not many businesses can trade without a bank account. Well, the worst of all of these things is the business isn't viable, okay? And they take on personally guaranteed debt. Now, there's a time to take on PGs. Like, I'm not adverse to some type of risk, but taking on PGs to just delay the inevitable essentially turns business debt that's got limited liability into personal debt. That's where your houses are on the line. Now, all of these things that I talked about earlier, you know, the panic paying people who screaming the loudest, it's called a preference payment. You know, carrying on trading with blind hope is trading insolvently. If you get wound up, the official receiver, let me tell you, they are the outcome's always worse. And obviously PGs, all of these, they can create personal debt, personal risk where none existed originally, you know. And I get it, you're frightened, you don't know where to turn. You want to pay this supplier because you know them and you like them, and you want to pay your uncle who's lent you the money. And what ends up happening is you drain the cash in the business. You know, if you've paid someone who you shouldn't have done, when you become insolvent, all that means is you can't pay your debts when they fall due, okay? Liabilities are more than your assets. Your responsibilities change, and you can't make creditors' positions any worse. And if you pay one supplier over another, or one subcontractor over another, or you pay your Auntie Mildred back in preference of HMRC in the bank, it's a preference claim, preference payment. And what that means is an insolvency practitioner can make you personally liable for that money that you've paid, and it happens all the time. Now, there are circumstances where you can pay a supplier, but the idea is you're paying that supplier. Let's say you're a builder and it's going to cost you, I don't know, 20 grand to pay a supplier and a subby. But that 20 grand you pay is going to bring 30 grand into the pot for creditors. Well, you're allowed to do that. But if you're paying a supplier just because he's your mate and you've worked with him for years, that's the type of thing that's going to cause you issues. When you want to keep trading because you hope it's going to sort itself out in the next job, if you deepen the losses by those creditors, so you basically traded blindly, you didn't look at your margins, you didn't understand whether you were going to make any profit, you were just delaying the inevitable, that's where you can, you know, insolvency is going to become messy and personal liability might hit you. And it's the same with like when you're forced into insolvency, you're forced via a compulsory liquidation. Now, okay, you might not have had to pay for that liquidation, but you've lost control. Instead of you finding an insolvency practitioner that you want to work with, okay, the official receiver will pick it up, and they're a public body. So there's no commerciality around them. And I've seen this, if you are wound up, the consequences for you personally are always more severe than if you do it voluntarily. And obviously if you've signed a PG, PG is going to follow you. Personal guarantee means if you don't, if your business falters, if your business goes into default, you are personally on the hook for that debt. You're going to chase your purses where your house can be on the line. So listen, let me tell you what we did, okay? When these guys come to director first, the first things we did is we slowed everything down. We didn't push it out and say, oh, don't do anything, don't worry, be happy. We just went, right, no knee-jerk decisions here, okay? No promises to pay certain creditors. We reviewed every supplier properly, looked at the agreements, confirmed there were no PGs. We looked honestly at the viability of the business. And we sort of said, you know, given what's gone on here, have you got any hope of recovery? Have you got any hope of paying everybody back? And the answer was no. Like, the market had changed. But once we had that clarity, the path forward was obvious. And a liquidation was the right move for everyone, not just for the directors, but for the creditors. It wasn't failing because of misconduct. It was failing because the numbers no longer worked. The market changed. And at that point, the goal shifts and it's no longer how do we survive, it becomes how do we stop this getting worse. And that's what a creditor's voluntary liquidation allowed them to do. Obviously, trading stopped. Once they appointed the insolvency practitioner, the pressure froze and sort of moved on to the insolvency practitioner, and all creditors got treated equally and fairly. Now, you can appreciate some of the creditors weren't happy, but some of the suppliers were insured against the debt. The subcontractors understood most of them. And by the directors acting early enough, it protected them. And this were all done before the hand got forced. And the outcome was exactly what you want in a case like this. You know, it's never a nice thing to go through, but it was a clean liquidation. There was no personal guarantees. All the creditors got handled by the insolvency practitioner. There was no court hearing. There was no panic. It was very sad. But once he made the decision, the sleepless nights stopped. And that's what controlled exit looks like. Now, the big lesson, if you're a director watching this, this highlights something I want every director to understand. You don't close a limited company to avoid responsibility. You close it to protect yourself, to stop the damage to creditors, and draw a legal line under a business that can't continue. And this business couldn't continue. There was no viable option. There was no pre-pack route out of this. The directors didn't roll the dice. They didn't borrow more. They didn't wait to be chased and forced. They acted early, and because of that, they walked away clean. If you're in a UK director, okay, and supplier pressure's building, you're not paying HMRC, you don't want to wait for it to spiral, speak to us today, okay? We'll tell you where you really stand, what risks actually exist, and whether you can close safely, legally, and without becoming a personal problem. Now, if you've, I don't want to say enjoyed the video, okay, that's probably the wrong terminology. But if you want to find out about more how, let's say you've got a viable business, but you need to use an insolvency process because the business isn't viable anymore, but there's some viable parts of the business. I want you to go over there and look at the videos we've done around pre-packs, okay? We'll show you how you buy your business and start again. Thanks for your time, Chris Worden, Director First.